Welcome back to the Scarlet Faithful podcast. I'm Aaron Brightman. This episode is brought to you by Knights of the Raritan, the Rutgers NIL Collective. I will have the link to the newsletter, free newsletter for Knights of the Raritan within Rutgers Sports. They do a great job covering things. Knights of the Raritan provides a unique way for Rutgers athletic programs to be successful in an ever-changing NIL environment that changes pretty much daily these days. Become a member of the Knights of the Raritan for a chance to win giveaways, unique experiences, exclusive event invites, and more. Help support our Rutgers student athletes with NIL. I encourage you to do so. This episode, let's focus on Rutgers football. We're only a little bit over 2 months now away from the start of training camp, early August. Memorial Day has now passed. June hits the calendar this weekend, and you're starting to see more and more chatter, preseason projections. Athlon leaked some stuff this week before their full publication comes out. We'll see more and more of that in the coming weeks, and we'll obviously be covering that. Wanted to focus on the annual tradition of Athlon Sports with the anonymous quotes from other coaches within the conference. Also wanted to share some perspective and kind of power rankings within the social media of Big Ten sites and outlets and accounts, and some of which I kind of interact with. There is a thunderstorm going on as I'm recording this. I thought it might sound kind of cool, so I'm running with it with the windows open. If you hear that, the old thunder and lightning tribute, Bruce Presley and Terrell Willis. If you know that reference, that running back combo in Rutgers football history, you're either as old as I am, older, or you just know your stuff. But what a duo that was. But yeah, there's a lot of really good, and obviously I'm biased being in that kind of, arena as well in terms of social media and fan accounts, and just there's a lot of knowledgeable people out there. They don't have to be traditional media. And a lot of those people right now are pretty high on Rutgers. So wanted to cover that. Let's start with the anonymous quotes from Athlon. Always an interesting journey, but I have to say, I thought that this year's edition for Rutgers, there were 4 anonymous quotes from coaches around the conference. They were pretty fair and mostly pretty positive. So that is obviously a great sign in terms of just perception changing across the Big Ten with Rutgers football. First quote: they turned the corner last season, and for the first time since Greg Schiano came back, they are going to have depth you need to be competitive in the league. Pretty positive, pretty fair. I think it's true. In terms of depth, I've mentioned, defensive line. Certainly, can they establish a solid 8 to 10 man core on that defensive line? Schiano's talked about the need for the defensive line to be more consistent, raise its game. And then I think wide receiver wise, there's a ton of young talent, really intriguing group. You obviously have Demir Miller, the All-American from FCS. You have Nassim Brantley now eligible from FCS, All-Conference player. You have Chris Lowen back from injury. You have a lot of intriguing younger players. KJ Duff, the true freshman. You have Ian Strong back. You have Christian Dremel, your leading receiver, back at slot. There's just, Dylan Braithwaite, Fama Toure. There's a lot of potential with this group. But I think depth, consistency in terms of contributions from that group, the depth at wide receiver, the depth of defensive line, that's really what needs to come together, I think, aside from, of course, better quarterback play. But as far as an actual position group goes, those are the 2 position groups I think are key. But that statement, I think, is pretty accurate and pretty fair. Second anonymous quote: they finished in a spot where they were obviously less talented, lost to, and they were as good as or better than the rosters they beat. The next phase is elevating and recruiting and pulling that bigger conference win. Pretty fair. I think it's very true. I don't know what the streak is now, but Rutgers, I believe, is still the last P5, P4 team to beat a ranked team. It's over 30 games, 30-plus game losing streak against ranked opponents. Last win was against South Florida in 2009. But in terms of, kind of a signature win in Big Ten play as well, this season coming up, the schedule is pretty favorable. I don't know how many ranked opponents are going to be there. Hopefully at USC is a ranked opponent. But it's possible that they might not have another ranked opponent on the schedule, which obviously bodes well for the potential, the opportunity that this season provides. But at the same time, that type of signature win at USC certainly would be. But even if they can't get a ranked win, even if they can't get a signature win, let's just get a lot of wins. And Rutgers has the chance to do that with this schedule, which I'll get to in a little bit. But overall, I think very fair anonymous quote there. Number 2, those teams that were clearly better, mostly off the schedule this year, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, even Iowa, clearly was a better team last year. Those teams are off the schedule. Most of the power rankings I'm going to go over, the top 5 teams, pretty much consensus: Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, Iowa, and Oregon. Not in that order, but that's pretty much what you're seeing right now in the top 5 power rankings. None of them are on the schedule this year for Rutgers, so huge opportunity there. Third quote, they have a really nice stable of running backs and some decent guys have developed at receiver. I like the running back comment. Obviously, Kamanunga led the Big Ten in rushing. Sam Brown, I really think, is going to have a good bounce back year, being healthy now. They have some intriguing pieces, younger pieces. Jashawn Benjamin. You have, obviously, Gabe Winovich. I think they're going to be more of a factor. You have Ed Grier as well. I think they're going to be more of a factor in the pass game this year. So that's something to look out for. But fair statement there with the running backs. And then they had some decent guys develop at receiver. I think it was true. I think that last year, Dave Brock and the offense, they did a great job with the receiving core they had. The thing I think is a little bit odd about the statement is that they're pretty much all gone now. So it's kind of starting from scratch. Obviously, some returnees, mentioned Ian Strong before. I still believe in him. But overall, I guess it's a compliment that they did develop some decent receivers last year, but that's not really going to have an impact on this season. Fourth anonymous quote, I would say they're on track to move up a little bit and maybe catch someone by surprise, significantly behind the elite of the league. I think it's hard to argue that's not true. I mean, obviously, recruiting rankings wise, all that, they're not close to the blue bloods of the league in terms of recruiting, in terms of stockpiling talent and depth, like Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, Oregon, USC. All those teams are far more talented from a recruiting metric standpoint. So, will that ever change? I don't know. Obviously, NIL, transfer portal, the NCAA changing. It's hard to say. May never get to that level, and that might be just unfair expectations. But that doesn't mean Rutgers can't be a very successful program in the Big Ten and recruit at a high level for Rutgers. And that is, top 25. That's where Shiano left the program, and that's where he's, hopefully will get it back. But all in all, I think pretty fair quotes there. Liked what was said. I think if you go back and look at past years, it's by far the most positive they've ever been. And I think they were pretty accurate. So no complaints there. And I think it paints a pretty fair picture in terms of what Rutgers is. They've obviously made a jump. They've moved up to respectability. Now, can they take that next step this coming season and make the leap a lot of people outside of the traditional media think they can? The first power rankings comes from a friend of the podcast, Jeffrey the Greek. Have had him on several times. He also is the co-host of the Eyes on Big Ten podcast. Great podcast. They cover all 14 teams. And he is super high on Rutgers. He has Rutgers 7th in his power rankings that came out this week. His comment, light on superstars, but solid everywhere. Check the schedule. 8+ wins are there. So that's been the chatter lately in terms of fan expectations for Rutgers. Can they get over the 8-win hump? Can they get to the 8-win hump? Can they get over it? Certainly, opportunity bounds. I mentioned previously, you look at those first 7 games, would not shock me, would not, if they were 7-0. Also, would not shock me if they were 4-3. So I think the line is thin. The margin for error is thin. Any given Sunday, cheesy, whatever. Al Pacino, he's nuts. But just love that speech and love the message of, the inches are in front of us everywhere in life and in football. But that's how close Rutgers, the line's going to be. And David Anderson has talked about that as well in this podcast, about the difference between 5-7, 6-6, 7-5, 8-4. It could just be a handful of plays next season. So that's obviously critical in terms of execution. with, the game on the line. But optimism, it's fair to have it. It's exciting. And it's great to see the friend of the podcast, Jeffrey Greek, believe in them. Also, friend of the podcast, Ben Stevens. He is a great Twitter follow. He's host of the Sports Grid. Big Ten Ben's his nickname. Actually went to Syracuse, which is funny, but he loves the Big Ten. I've had him on the podcast before. He came out with a tweet late Wednesday. So it's a Wednesday in late May. So it's the perfect time for a bold prediction ahead of the 2024 college football season. The Rutgers Scarlet Knights will win 8+ games this year. Love it. A response he got from the We Live for Big Ten Saturday podcast. We Live for Saturday podcast, all about the Big Ten. Replied and said, "We've been saying it all offseason. Check it out. New episode drops tonight. Plug for them." But they've been saying it as well. But thanks, Ben Stevens, for that. Love to see that. Big Ten football power rankings according to SP Plus. Now, this is the one that's a little bit negative. It's based on analytics. It's kind of the Ken Palm for college football. It's Bill Connolly, now with ESPN, formerly of SB Nation. SP Plus. He has Rutgers 13th out of 18 Big Ten teams. Indiana 18, Michigan State 17, Northwestern 16, Purdue 15. Half glass empty. None of those 4 teams are on the schedule this year. Then you have Illinois at 14, Rutgers 13, Minnesota 12, Maryland, Nebraska 10, Washington 9, Wisconsin 8, UCLA 7. All those teams are on the schedule. Iowa 6, not. USC 5. And then the 4 heavyweights of the conference, I would say, fair to say, Penn State 4, Michigan 3, Oregon 2, Ohio State 1. That's the one. Not so optimistic about Rutgers. Athlon Sports has the power rankings out. Rutgers is 10th. Doesn't mention anything groundbreaking, just mentions needing to improve the offense, having potential with the defense with so many stars. So a little bit of a mixed bag. Analytically, it's based on returning production. But I think that's, a little surprising just based on Rutgers having so much production back. Again, quarterback, offense, certainly holding them back there. But in terms of the eye test, in terms of people that follow the Big Ten, in terms of like hardcore fans, there's a lot of optimism out there for Rutgers. The schedule, friendly reminder. Let's go through it to end the podcast episode, focusing on the anonymous quotes and now just getting into how people are looking at things. Howard on August 31st, Akron September 7th, both at SHI Stadium. Obviously, must wins. And the 2 games all season that Rutgers is heavily favored to win. And the other 10, as I've said, I really think could go either way. At Virginia Tech, with Rutgers on a bye, coming off a bye week. Blacksburg's a tough place to play. Huge swing game in the season. Then you come home for the blackout game Friday night, Big Ten opener, welcomes Washington. I was at that Washington. I think it was a Thursday night game to open the season. Was that 2017 with Chris Ash? Then you go to Lincoln, Nebraska. Then you host Wisconsin. Then you host UCLA. So those are the first 7 games. I think you could win all 7. You could lose 3. I mean, honestly, you could lose all 4 of those 5. At Virginia Tech, Washington, home, at Nebraska, Wisconsin, UCLA. Worst case scenario, I think you could lose 4 of those games, but I wouldn't be shocked if they win them all. Most likely, listen, they can be 5-2 out of that stretch. That's obviously huge to get to 8 wins. You go to USC on that Friday night, 11 p.m. start, and you're home with Minnesota at Maryland, who, listen, Maryland's given Rutgers a ton of fits last few years. Illinois at home, and then at Michigan State. Thanksgiving weekend. Rutgers basketball will be in Vegas. Rutgers football will be in Michigan State. New coach, but not a lot of positivity in terms of the projections for the roster right now. Huge opportunity for Rutgers to end the season on a high note. But let's listen. I love the continuity of this program. I love that they have 2 months now to really work together, build cohesion, build leadership, build around the strong core, returning core they have, getting the offense on the same page, going into training camp, hitting the ground running? And can they get to those 8+ wins next season? I think they can. It's not an official prediction, but it's just great to see for someone that's covered Rutgers since they've joined the Big Ten. I mean, we just get ragged on all the time by other fan bases and no respect. And you know what? Unfortunately, there was reasons for that. And now those reasons are gone. Greg Schiano has changed the program's trajectory. He has brought credibility back. And this is the opportunity to make that leap from cellar dweller to middle of the pack to now can they establish themselves as a top half team in that 5 to 8 range. I know some people have dreams of more. There's a 12-team playoff. 3 teams from the Big Ten could make it. Some people hope or think that Rutgers can do that. I do think with the schedule, the margin for error is slim for that. Not a lot of signature wins out there. Not a lot of ranked wins probably going to be out there. But if they can win all those 50-50 matchups, which is very hard to do, but 11-1, 10-2 Rutgers, can they make the playoff? Tell me they can't. Thank you for listening and watching to this episode of the Scarlet Faithful podcast, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.